You are sitting in a silent room. A screen illuminates the dark. Without a single conscious thought, your hand reaches out to surrender another hour. Why do you feel completely exhausted when you have physically done nothing? Because you aren't tired. You are being dismantled. You sit there, endlessly scrolling through manufactured urgency, while the exact work required to change your life sits untouched beside you. You feel drained because you are actively operating inside an extraction engine. The system does not want your money first. It wants your reactivity. Every time you surrender your focus to a notification, you become a human battery, subsidizing the wealth of someone else's empire. Today, we architect a focus so ruthlessly guarded, it makes you structurally invincible. You will establish the sovereign mind. But to build this fortress, you first have to understand exactly who has already breached your gates. You have been conditioned to believe that staying informed is the exact same thing as staying relevant. You walk through your day carrying a quiet, pervasive anxiety. It is a permanent, low-grade tension whispering that if you do not check the message, if you do not read the room, if you do not respond within minutes, you will inevitably lose your standing. You feel a deeply ingrained compulsion to remain constantly plugged into the grid, assuming that your endless availability makes you indispensable. It does not. It makes you a cheap, easily accessible commodity. Understand this clearly. Your lack of focus is not a personal failure of willpower. You are operating in a hostile environment, explicitly engineered by behavioral architects whose singular objective is to keep your mind vibrating with manufactured urgency. The hidden mechanism destroying your leverage is cognitive leakage. The modern world does not usually extract your focus in grand, dramatic thefts that you can easily spot and fight against. Instead, it bleeds your momentum through microtransactions. Every single time you turn your head to address a meaningless notification, every time you pause your strategic work to offer a passing opinion on a situation you cannot control, you are paying a permanent tax on your own agency. These fractions of attention feel entirely insignificant in the moment. They are easily justified as just staying in the loop, but they compound relentlessly. By the end of the day, your premier cognitive capital is completely depleted, spent entirely on social friction that yields absolutely zero return on the actual trajectory of your life. Look at the concrete reality of your daily arena. You are sitting in an open-plan office, or perhaps you are staring at a chaotic group chat on your screen. A minor crisis erupts. A problem that has absolutely nothing to do with your core objectives, your goals, or your future. Yet the manufactured urgency of the environment demands your immediate, visible input. You stop your deep work. You analyze their drama. You offer a carefully typed response just to prove that you are engaged and present. You think you are demonstrating competence. In reality, you are participating in a mutual exchange of wasted energy. You are actively subsidizing the incompetence, panic, and lack of direction of other people, using your own finite focus as the currency. Consider the strategic principles of Niccolò Machiavelli regarding the management of sovereign resources. Machiavelli explicitly warned that a state which expends its wealth and military strength, fighting endless foreign skirmishes on behalf of other nations, will eventually find itself far too weak to defend its own capital. Your attention is your capital. Your mind is the capital city. When you constantly deploy your focus to fight every minor fire that breaks out in your periphery, you leave your own psychological borders entirely undefended. The status cost of this endless reactivity is catastrophic. By reacting to everything thrown your way, you are broadcasting a very specific, damaging signal to the world. You are signaling that your time has zero market value. The strategic correction requires a complete and ruthless reversal of your operational baseline. You must shift to a state of default unreachable. The modern expectation is that you are always on, always available, and always ready to perform for the crowd. You must dismantle that expectation completely. Your baseline state must be absolute, impenetrable silence. Availability is not an inherent right that the world possesses over your time. It is a highly exclusive privilege that you occasionally grant to things of actual strategic value. When you adopt the strict architecture of being default unreachable, you stop leaking cognitive capital. You begin to dictate the terms of your own engagement. A man who reacts to everything commands nothing. You close the borders. You stop the cognitive leakage. You reclaim the capital. But the moment you finally go silent, the system fights back, and it uses the people closest to you to do it. Focus is an act of aggression against the entitled. When you finally decide to close your borders and reclaim your cognitive capital, do not expect a standing ovation. You will not be met with respect. You will be met with immediate, visceral resistance. You know this pain intimately. You finally sit down to execute a major move. You put your phone on silent. You ignore the immediate pings, and hours later, when you re-emerge from the work, you are met with passive-aggressive guilt. A colleague, an associate, or a friend accuses you of acting distant, cold, or unreachable. The immediate psychological reaction conditioned into you is guilt. You feel the sudden, overwhelming urge to over-explain, to apologize for being focused, to soothe their wounded ego. This is the exact moment where most men break. They trade their sovereignty just to avoid the temporary discomfort of being misunderstood. The hidden mechanism operating against you here is the entitlement matrix. People in your life, even those with seemingly benign intentions, have grown completely accustomed to your permanent availability. Over time, they have fundamentally confused your instant reactivity with loyalty. They believe that their minor inconvenience or sudden emotional spike dictates your immediate attention. When you remove that access, they do not see it as you building your future. They experience it as a direct withdrawal of their resources. They feel robbed because you have effectively stopped funding their chaos. Look at the concrete reality of this dynamic. You are in the middle of a critical phase of your work. A text message comes in. It is not an emergency. It is a minor complaint, a piece of office gossip, or a demand for your opinion on a trivial matter. You read it, and you choose to leave it on read to maintain your momentum. Within 30 minutes, the sender escalates the situation. They send a follow-up, or they call, manufacturing a false sense of urgency simply to force a reaction out of you. They are testing the boundary. They are not looking for a genuine solution to their problem. They are looking for validation. They are trying to soothe their own ego by proving they can still disrupt your state at will. The status cost here is absolute and unforgiving. If you cave to their emotional escalation, if you pause your empire to send that reassuring paragraph to explain exactly why you were busy, you have just lost the war. You have proven, structurally, that their emotional comfort is far more important than your life's work. You have signaled that your boundaries are merely suggestions, easily broken by a minor display of passive aggression. Every single time you apologize for your focus, you hemorrhage status. You teach them that you can be pulled off your path with minimal effort. The strategic correction is brutal, but absolutely necessary. You must hold the silent line. You must learn to sit quietly in the discomfort of their displeasure. Let them misinterpret you. Let them call you arrogant. Let them be highly offended. Your focus will offend people who relied on your distraction. When you strip away their unearned access, the resulting friction is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is the ultimate proof that the boundary is actually working. You are transitioning from a shared public resource to a sovereign entity. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I no longer finance other people's chaos with my attention." This declaration is the first critical step in establishing your territory. But simply ignoring a few frantic messages is not enough to secure your borders permanently. The friction will continue, and the attacks will adapt until you change the physical reality of your environment. Once you cut their funding, you must build the fortress so they cannot breach the walls again. A fortress is not defined by what it lets in. It is defined by what it structurally keeps out. You start your morning with a pristine vision of productivity. You tell yourself that today you will not be distracted. You place your phone face down on your desk, right next to your keyboard. You believe this is discipline. You think you are demonstrating restraint. But by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, your mental resistance inevitably fractures. The minor friction of a difficult task hits, and your hand automatically reaches for the device. The extraction engine claims you again. You sit there feeling profound shame, blaming your own weak character. But your character is not the flaw. You brought willpower to a structural siege. The hidden mechanism actively defeating you is environmental subordination. You are relying on willpower, and willpower is a finite, highly unreliable mercenary. It demands constant cognitive payment, and it will always betray you the exact moment you are exhausted, stressed, or bored. Environmental design, however, is a standing army. When you leave a source of distraction in your immediate periphery, your brain must actively expend cognitive capital simply to ignore it. Every single second that phone sits on your desk, even face down, even on silent, a subconscious background process in your mind is actively resisting the urge to check it. This drains your premier focus before you even execute a single strategic move. Look at the physical architecture of your daily arena. You sit at a desk with an open internet browser, notification badges glowing red, and your phone resting mere inches from your hand. In this environment, you are fighting a constant, invisible war of attrition. You are bleeding energy just to maintain baseline attention. Now, imagine a completely different architecture. Imagine working in a room where that device is physically locked in a drawer, placed on another floor, or functionally left in another postal code. The router is disconnected. The temptation is not being resisted. It has been entirely removed from reality. The friction required to access the distraction is suddenly too high. The mind stops fighting and surrenders completely to the work. You do not have to battle what cannot reach you. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius did not govern Rome by simply hoping he would not be distracted by petty court politics or the endless chaos of the empire. He retreated to the inner citadel, a fortified psychological state that remains utterly untouched by external siege. But an inner citadel is impossible to maintain if you refuse to build outer walls. A sovereign architect does not leave the gates wide open and rely on hand-to-hand combat to defend the throne room. They build the walls so high and dig the trenches so deep that the enemy never even approaches the gates. Relying on raw willpower makes you fundamentally fragile. It leaves you prone to sudden, embarrassing collapse under pressure. When you pit your personal discipline against billion-dollar behavioral algorithms designed by the smartest engineers on Earth, you are playing a peasant's game. You are willingly turning your sovereign territory into a permanent battlefield. You hemorrhage status because you are continuously struggling against temptation rather than operating in a realm far above it. A king does not fight in the mud. The strategic correction is absolute structural blindness. You must stop trying to resist distraction. Resistance is a subordinate's strategy. It implies the distraction has power over you. Instead, you must engineer a physical and digital environment where distraction literally cannot access you. Block the sites at the router level. Remove the device from the room. Delete the accounts that extract your energy. You must weaponize your environment so that your default state is total, uncompromising immersion. Do not fight the noise. Starve it of your presence. You lock the door. You build the walls. You separate yourself from the physical devices of extraction. But a physical wall is entirely useless if you are still emotionally vulnerable to the enemies hiding inside your own head. The fastest way to lose your focus is to defend yourself to a fool. You know exactly how this feels. A detractor makes a subtle, passive-aggressive comment about your work, your choices, or your trajectory. Instantly, your pulse spikes. You spend the next 3 hours entirely consumed by the interaction, replaying the argument in your head a dozen times. You draft a multi-paragraph message, deleting and rewriting it, desperately trying to prove your logic to someone who is fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. Why do you do this? Because you have been conditioned to crave universal alignment. You have been trained to believe that if someone misinterprets your intentions, it is your absolute responsibility to correct their perception. Whether it is a man falling into a cheap ego trap, or a high-agency woman being pressured into performing exhausting emotional labor to soothe an insecure colleague, the vulnerability is the exact same. You believe you are defending your reputation. You think you are standing your ground. But the hidden mechanism operating against you here is emotional economics. Anger, frustration, and the compulsion to over-explain are not indicators of strength. They are massive, debilitating expenditures of your cognitive capital. In the economy of attention, your emotional reactivity is the most expensive currency you possess. You are taking the exact energy required to build your empire and setting it on fire to warm someone else's fragile ego. Look at the concrete reality of this dynamic. You are sitting in a boardroom, or perhaps navigating a high-stakes meeting. Someone questions your authority or throws a veiled insult to test your composure. The trap is perfectly set. They are demanding that you leak energy. They want you to fracture your focus, trying to convince them of your inherent value. If you bite, if you open your mouth to frantically defend your reasoning, you have already lost the exchange. You have validated their manufactured authority to question you. The focus you needed to execute your master plan is now bleeding out on the conference table over a trivial dispute. Niccolò Machiavelli observed the mechanics of power and noted a stark reality regarding petty provocations. A prince does not descend into the mud to fight a peasant. When a sovereign engages in a street brawl, the street brawler gains immense status simply by being allowed in the arena. The sovereign, however, loses status the exact moment they step off the throne to engage. The status cost of over-explaining is absolute and irreversible. When you defend your choices to people who have zero leverage over your actual future, you hemorrhage status. You fracture your concentration for the rest of the day, essentially handing the remote control of your emotional state over to a detractor. You are actively subsidizing their relevance with your premier attention. The strategic correction is the weaponization of silence. You must learn to use absolute absence and non-reaction as your primary instruments of psychological dominance. When the passive-aggressive comment is made, you do not retaliate. You do not explain your rationale. You hold unbroken eye contact for 3 long, devastatingly uncomfortable seconds in total silence. You let their verbal provocation hang awkwardly in the air, completely unsupported by your reaction. And then, without a single word of justification, you simply return to your work. The energy stays completely with you. The friction and the embarrassment reflect entirely back onto them. You have successfully denied them the emotional extraction they were desperately seeking. This is the highest form of social focus. Never finance a petty conflict with your premier focus. You must protect your cognitive capital from social thieves just as ruthlessly as you protect it from digital algorithms. But silence in the moment is only half of the strategy. To achieve this level of permanent structural silence, you must ruthlessly audit what remains in your life. You cannot optimize a machine that is fundamentally clogged with debris. Yet, this is exactly what you attempt every single time you try to upgrade your life. You try to layer pristine, high-performance habits over a structurally rotten foundation. You add a new morning routine, but you keep the deep digital addictions. You attempt to build iron discipline, but you continue to tolerate low-tier obligations and draining relationships. You are trying to install elite software onto a completely corrupted hard drive. The exhaustion you feel is the sheer friction of carrying an unsustainable load. You cannot build a sovereign empire while dragging the dead weight of your previous, distracted life. The hidden mechanism you must understand is asymmetric leverage. The modern self-improvement industry constantly sells you on the idea of addition. Buy this new tool. Adopt this complex routine. Add another task to your calendar. But true strategic focus is not about adding more discipline to your life. It is about absolute subtraction. Removing one single negative input, one draining relationship, one addictive application, one recurring obligation that steals your energy, yields 10 times more focus than adding a new positive habit. Asymmetric leverage dictates that cutting the anchor propels you forward infinitely faster than simply rowing harder. Look at the concrete reality of what this elimination looks like in practice. You sit down with your device, and you ruthlessly unfollow 90% of your feed. You do not explain yourself to anyone. You simply sever the digital connection to anyone whose content does not directly sharpen your mind. You look at your professional schedule, and you permanently cancel the recurring meeting that produces absolutely zero strategic outcome. You silently walk away from the social circle that only gathers to complain, gossip, and drag each other down into comfortable mediocrity. You do not make a grand announcement about your departure. You simply stop showing up. You reclaim your territory through cold, unapologetic elimination. Historically, the most decisive military commanders understood the absolute power of this elimination. When a conquering army landed on hostile foreign shores, the general would often give a terrifying command to burn the boats. By destroying their own vessels, they completely removed the psychological safety net of going home. Retreat was literally erased from reality. They had to advance and conquer, or they had to perish. You must apply this exact military doctrine to your own attention. By burning the bridges to your comfortable distractions, you eliminate the possibility of a cowardly retreat into mediocrity. The status cost of refusing to purge your environment is a slow, agonizing descent into the average. When you insist on carrying dead weight, you guarantee that you remain perpetually slow. You make yourself an easy target, quickly caught and consumed by the herd. By refusing to let go, you signal to the world that you are a hoarder of low-value inputs, terrified to abandon the familiar, even when it is actively dismantling your potential. The strategic correction is the execution of the purge. You must stop trying to balance everything. A sovereign architect does not seek harmony with foreign invaders. They expel them from the territory. You must relentlessly eliminate any input, habit, or association that does not directly serve the master blueprint of your empire. Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to remove. Go to the comments and declare it. My focus is a closed border. Access is earned, never assumed. When you finally execute this purge, you will look around and see that the noise is completely gone. But be warned. When the noise is finally gone, you will be left with the most terrifying thing a person can face. The silence you are left with will deafen you at first. When you finally execute the purge and close your borders, the immediate psychological response is not a profound sense of peace. It is withdrawal. You have spent years fully acclimated to the constant vibration of manufactured urgency. Your nervous system is genuinely addicted to the low-grade friction of notifications, demands, and external validation. When that noise suddenly stops, the quiet feels deeply unnatural. You will feel a sudden, terrifying urge to seek out chaos, just to feel something familiar. You will reach for the device that is no longer there. You will check for messages from people you already blocked. You will manufacture imaginary problems just to give your mind a reason to panic. This is the final trap of the extraction engine. It relies entirely on your inability to sit quietly in an empty room. If you panic in the silence, if you decide that the solitude of your own focus is simply too uncomfortable to endure, you will inevitably invite the chaos back in. You will unblock the accounts, answer the passive-aggressive texts, and re-engage with the exact mediocrity you just escaped. And the moment you do, you lose the empire. You prove that you are fundamentally incapable of holding your own territory. You regress from a sovereign architect back into an exploitable resource. The hidden mechanism you are experiencing here is the brutal transition phase before identity lock. Building an impenetrable focus is not a temporary tactic or a 30-day challenge. It is a permanent neurological and psychological rewiring. In the beginning, maintaining this boundary feels like something you actively do. It requires conscious effort and massive friction. But as you hold the silent line, day after day, refusing to negotiate with the noise, a profound structural shift occurs within you. The focus transforms from an exhausting action into a baseline state of being. You stop trying to concentrate. You simply are concentrated. Your identity locks into place. Look at the concrete reality of operating at this elite level. You are sitting in a perfectly quiet room. The phone is disconnected. The borders are completely secured. You look at the complex work in front of you, the exact work that used to intimidate you into a state of immediate distraction. But this time, your pulse does not spike. There is no desperate urge to escape. There is only an absolute cold certainty that nothing in this world can break your rhythm. You operate with a terrifying precision, executing your strategy block by block. Hours pass, and you remain entirely unmoved by the chaos of the outside world. You do not check for validation because you are no longer operating from a deficit of status. The strategic correction here is simply acclimating to the altitude. High-altitude environments are thin on oxygen and entirely devoid of tourists. The air up here is cold, clear, and highly isolated. You must learn to breathe in the thin air of elite performance without rushing back down to the crowded valleys just to feel the artificial warmth of the herd. The withdrawal symptoms will fade. The silence will transform from a deafening void into a highly functional, weaponized workspace. You will stop interpreting the quiet as isolation and start recognizing it as pure, unfiltered leverage. When you reach this state, you become completely untouchable. You cannot be manipulated by manufactured outrage. You cannot be derailed by petty office politics. You cannot be distracted by cheap entertainment because your threshold for engagement is now impossibly high. The world will continuously try to extract your energy, and it will fail every single time because there is simply no access point left to breach. When you stop being a resource, you become a sovereign. This is the state where empires are built. Now, you must take the first step. You began this briefing exhausted. You are running on the fumes of your own cognitive capital, systematically extracted by an economy explicitly designed to keep you perpetually reactive. You felt like a powerless spectator in the trajectory of your own life, bleeding energy to subsidize the chaos of other people. You end this briefing as an architect, holding the uncompromising blueprint to a psychological fortress. We established at the beginning that the extraction engine was dismantling you piece by piece. But the cold, undeniable truth of the modern attention economy is this: the engine only works on those who willingly leave their borders entirely undefended. The system cannot extract what it literally cannot access. The extraction ends today. Your borders are now officially and permanently closed. You are stepping into a profound identity upgrade. You are no longer a fragmented individual waking up each morning simply trying to focus. You are no longer relying on the fragile, exhausting currency of willpower to survive the daily onslaught of noise. You have transitioned into a structurally sound, psychologically untouchable force. Focus is no longer a temporary action you attempt to perform. It is the permanent, impenetrable state in which you exist. Niccolo Machiavelli delivered a brutal warning to the rulers of his time. He stated that a prince who possesses a state but fails to build a fortified citadel is a prince simply waiting to be conquered by the first passing mercenary. Your mind is your premier state. Your attention is your absolute throne. If you leave it completely open to the general public, if you allow unearned access to anyone who demands it, you automatically forfeit your right to rule it. Build the walls, dig the trenches, secure the gates. Do not let this briefing become just another piece of temporary intellectual entertainment that you consume and immediately forget. Execution is the only metric that separates the sovereign from the subordinate. Here is your final strategic command. Review your physical and digital environment today. Identify the single largest leak of your cognitive capital, the one demanding person, the one addictive application, the one recurring obligation that extracts your premier attention without yielding any strategic return. And permanently neutralize it by midnight. Sever the access completely. If you are prepared to build these walls, if you are truly ready to reclaim your psychological territory from the noise, subscribe to Leverage Doctrine. We do not provide motivation, we provide the architecture. Let the world burn in its own distraction. You have an empire to build.